There's little doubt that today, the United States is the reigning global superpower on Earth. But what is debated is who will be the next global superpower. Is the United States on the decline? If so, who is taking its place? To this, many people's answer is China. China has had an absolutely epic rise over the last few decades. More people in China have been lifted out of poverty at a faster pace than we've ever seen in history. But is this rise sustainable? And if not, then what is ultimately going to cause this rise to sputter, grind to a halt, and ultimately potentially even lead to the collapse of China? And at the end of this video, I will give you more information about the sponsor of today's video, I Trust Capital, where you can invest in gold, silver, and Bitcoin with your retirement account. The rise of China over the last couple of decades has been nothing short of spectacular. As recently as the 1980s, China was an agrarian society. Much of this was due to the top-down control and extreme communist dictatorship style of government that they had for a long time. Estimates of how many people were killed under Mao's communist leadership are at the bottom end 3 million, and at the upper end reaching all the way to 40 million. With this type of a history in the rear view mirror, it makes their rise even more impressive. But instead of following the prior path, China decided to try a little bit of capitalism. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping visited Singapore, where he was astounded by the level of development in just 2 generations. Following this model, China allowed a little bit of capitalism and a little bit of free markets, and the experiment worked out fantastically. People started moving from all across the nation into the cities as they were lifted out of poverty and were able to experience economic growth for the first time in generations. They now have the second highest number of millionaires in the world, second only to the United States. This is astounding considering that 1 or 2 generations ago, these millionaires' parents or grandparents were literally subsistence farmers, and that was the entire nation. But while they did try out allowing a little bit of freedom and a little bit of capitalism in order to bring business into the country and start lifting people out of poverty, they still exercise a very top-down command and control system over the country. This was made extremely evident during all of the lockdowns and all of the draconian laws and rules they put in place over the last couple of years. It also exposed a few dark secrets about the reasons why they were able to achieve such growth over the last couple of decades that are actually sowing the seeds for their epic collapse coming soon. Because by now, everybody had anticipated that China would be rocketing back higher on its path to future growth, that they get back on that aggressive train of accelerating their people coming out of poverty, increasing their wealth, increasing their income, development, and prosperity. But that just hasn't happened. Now more than ever, signs are popping up across China of markets being in trouble. China's sputtering to a halt has even started impacting oil prices across the globe. Despite the fact that China has in recent history been a hub of global manufacturing, their factory activity has recently been falling off a cliff, especially compared to expectations of their recovery. Not only that, but their property markets are also showing signs of danger. One of the consequences of exercising so much control over an economy is that you cause a misallocation of resources and malinvestment. One of the biggest areas of malinvestment in China over the last few decades has been in real estate, forcing its people to shove more and more money into real estate that ended up being a massive bubble. This has caused local governments across China to become more and more indebted and are now struggling to find funds looking for loopholes like pearl bonds. Basically, China spent decades with above average growth that nobody expected would be able to persist as long as it did. Then when COVID hit, they were one of the most aggressive with shutting their entire economy down, and everybody has been waiting for them to get back on the growth train. And the more they try, the more they fail. And this is really because of 2 fundamental structural problems that will prevent them from really gaining any further ground into the far future. And really, they're the very reasons why they had so much growth in the first place. They were basically borrowing a lot of that growth from the future, and now the bill is coming due. The first one of these problems is the population problem. China used to have something called a one-child policy. Despite the fact that in 2016 the limit was raised to 2 children and has recently been raised to 3 children, that one-child rule has been embedded in culture in China. This also means that families have prioritized having boy children rather than girl children because the boys had a much greater chance of having the financial success necessary to be able to take care of them once they were too old to take care of themselves. This has led to 2 major problems with China's population today. The first problem is China's gender ratio. Currently, for all of the childbearing years, there are far more males in China than there are females. This has led to a statistically significant percentage of the male population that, number 1, will never be able to get married, and number 2, will never be able to reproduce. This compounds on the other problem, which is the current population pyramid in China. There are far more old people in China than there are young people. And as the bulk of the population in China over the next 10 years or so will reach the age where they cannot work effectively anymore, there are not enough young people producing in the economy to take care of all the old people that cannot work anymore. And because of the gender ratio problem in China, this is not something that can be solved by just telling people to have more babies. There are simply not even enough women of childbearing age to fix this problem in China right now. And that's if they were to solve all the cultural issues where people are so used to not having any kids or just 1 or maybe just 2. So China was able to achieve massive growth off of the industrialization and the move from agrarian to more of a white collar city manufacturing base off of a workforce that is now aging out of the workforce. And there are simply not enough kids being born or people of working age to replace everyone that brought China to the economic powerhouse they are today. Now, if this were the only problem, then it's something that technically could be solved through immigration. If China was to rapidly become extremely free and become very attractive to immigration and be able to get their demographics fixed by people moving to China, then they might be able to still turn this thing around. But that's actually not their only problem. They do have another problem that's even bigger, and that is the debt problem. Everybody in the United States is aware of how bad the debt problem is in America. We've got the most over-leveraged households, individuals, corporations, and governments that we've ever had. We've got a huge debt to GDP ratio, and we do have problems. But China's got bigger problems. Over an 8-year time span from 2008 to 2016, the number of healthy companies with growing healthy earnings compared to their debt dropped by 31%, with an increase in loss-making companies and straight up unhealthy companies. This has caused a substantial increase over the last decade in non-performing loans. But it's not just the private sector. In fact, the private sector problems pale in comparison to the state debt problems. The local governments around China are struggling to pay their bills right now with hidden debts piling up left and right. In fact, now a majority of the regions across China have debt to income ratios over 120%. In fact, over the last year, China's national debt grew 3 times faster than the United States national debt did. Essentially, China has been financing their above average growth with even more above average debt growth for years. And the bill is finally coming due. This has not been sustainable growth. If they had the demographics to support it, then maybe they could have justified this above average debt growth and said, hey, at least in the future, we'll have a much higher output of productivity to be able to pay down this debt load. But the combination of an implosion of their population paired with their massive debt pileup is why you're starting to see signs all over the market that China's growth may be at its end. And while it did have an epic rise, the fall may be even more so. It's always possible China's able to pull another rabbit out of its hat, but at the rate they've been going, that's going to have to be one big rabbit. As always, Thanks for watching, and stick around to hear about today's sponsor, iTrustCapital. First, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, iTrustCapital. Today, people are concerned about the purchasing power of their dollars being eroded due to inflation. They're concerned about the returns they're getting on their traditional portfolios, things like stocks and bonds. Many people want to be able to purchase investments that will preserve their purchasing power, things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, ways to store the value of your money without being exposed to the dollar. What's the problem with this? The problem is that most people have most of their wealth in their 401ks, their employer's retirement accounts. And these accounts do not allow people to buy gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Some of them allow access to ETFs that have exposure to these prices. But number one, you're introducing many layers of counterparty risk. And number two, you don't actually own the asset itself. That's where iTrustCapital comes in. iTrustCapital allows you to open up actual retirement accounts, IRAs, traditional and Roth. You can even roll over funds from a previous employer's retirement account to fund this. You can buy gold, you can buy silver, you can buy Bitcoin, and even other cryptocurrencies with iTrustCapital. And if you sign up with my link in the description below, you'll get $100 worth of Bitcoin as a sign-up bonus for opening the account.